Get ready to enjoy some water ice because you're at the card pool. I'm your host, Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson.
And today we are continuing part 2 with our Hidden Gem segment of Judgment.
Like Stu said, this is part 2 of our multi-part set review of Judgment. You can take a look back at our previous video if you want to see some more of our Hidden Gem picks. But without further ado, let's start off this review.
Let's indeed, Kyle. Let's start off with no number other than number 5. And this one is a very unique card. When I first saw it, I was stunned. So we are talking about a green instant named Seed Time. It costs 2 mana, 1 generic, and a green. And it reads, play Seed Time only during your turn. Take an extra turn after this one if an opponent played a blue spell this turn. This is an amazing unknown card that I literally reread to make sure I was reading it right. This is a green's version of having extra turns. Green's version, extra turns. That doesn't exist really in the game of Magic. And for the time, it costs the same as a Time Walk, which is the original card that made it so that extra turns exist. And that card's banned in Commander. So you have access to that now. It blows my mind.
Well, this is very interesting because green, as you said, never ever takes extra turns, really. So this is a pretty big deal. But I will add that while this could potentially be very powerful, it's only useful if you're facing a certain kind of deck. Sure, if you're a green deck, you hate playing against blue decks, and this is a pretty good tool in your arsenal for it to work this way, work well against blue decks. But still, I couldn't possibly see playing this in my main deck when I don't know that I'm not going to be, when I don't know I'm going to be playing against a blue deck.
If you're running a mono green deck, right, this should be a staple.
It's just a dead card if you're not playing against blue, though.
But what are blue staples that are always played on other people's turns?
Yes, but you're not playing against, you don't know that you're playing against blue at least, and you can also only play this on your turn, so can't,
well, let's look at a card like Riku of the Twin Flames, the Twin Reflections, sorry. This is a commander that has blue. It also has excuse me, it also has green, so it could be warranted in this deck for just the fact that you could maybe duplicate this effect. So for this kind of deck, I wouldn't agree with it 100%. It'd be cool if you could reoccur with this, have the ability to get 2 extra turns, because I mean, if you are playing a Riku deck, you would want to get extra turns. So this is something that could be serviceable with something like that. Now, I see your point. Maybe not every deck, but what is the most common color in Magic that you always see people using?
Well, blue mostly, I'll admit.
Yeah, it evens out some troublesome decks. It makes it so you can draw cards, you can go ahead and even out your plays. So, yeah, the chances of someone playing something blue on your turn, I'd say it's pretty high. I mean, every time I've ever played you love playing stuff on my turn.
Well, maybe, but I would relegate this to pretty much strictly sideboard material. I know most people don't end up playing with sideboards in Commander, but if you do and your play group allows this, or maybe you're into competitive Commander or whatever like that, I would strictly list this as sideboard material, because if you're playing somebody with blue cards, side this in and have fun, because it's going to be awesome for you.
One example I have to bring up is one of the biggest staples that we see in blue is Cyclonic Rift, right?
Yeah.
I mean, aside from counterspells galore, those are all blue, and those being played on your turn is going to happen more than on your opponent's turn.
Right.
But I mean, you also have nifty cards that can, like, turn to frogs, which is something that's kind of a meta play. You can go ahead and make it so all your opponent's creatures are little 1/1 frogs without any effects. You can go ahead and use stuff like Aether Spouts to make it so that during your opponent's turn, or when somebody attacks, they all go to the bottom of the deck. So this is an ability for green to regrow, and green never has that. Like, really, most of the time, green's slow by 1 turn just because they put all this mana into something, and it's just taken away from it by some malicious blue player who doesn't like to have fun in this game.
Well, if you're playing this against somebody who's playing a blue deck, you certainly are going to have a lot of fun. And speaking of fun, I actually want to go on to my own number 5, which is all about having weird and bizarre kind of fun here. It's called Mortality Shift, and this is a black sorcery with a rather hefty mana cost of 7, 5 colorless and 2 black. Exchange your graveyard and your library, then shuffle your library. So, like it says on the card, you are basically taking your graveyard, making it your deck, and then taking your deck and putting it all straight into the graveyard. And I couldn't really come up with anything super broken to do with this off the top of my head other than the obvious kind of things, but there has to be some kind of crazy combo thing that you can do with this card. The only thing is, it costs 7 mana, so it's going to take a lot of time to probably set up, and especially because you have to be careful about what you're dumping and what you're not.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about a card like Laboratory Maniac, right?
Yeah,
For that,
exactly.
that's the obvious win con in this
Yeah.
case. And yeah, that would be pretty easy. If you have something like Heuristic Study out, you have, I don't know, even if there's something in the grave like 10 cards, it shouldn't be too hard to get that drawn out before this card gets destroyed off the field. Yeah, a little niche. 7 mana is heavy, especially
Yeah.
even for black. That's just, I mean, you need some way to cheat that out, honestly, and what's the answer for that? I'm not sure, but
Right.
this is a very interesting tech card for the fact that you can, if you perpetually mill yourself and you're not getting the stuff that you need, or you've exiled the stuff that you've already wanted, you might just need to play this just to get yourself like almost like a Karn-like effect of restarting the game, but without hurting or hitting everyone else to give them an advantage.
I really like this in a commander deck like Kess, Dissident Mage, for example, who lets you play instants and sorceries from your graveyard, because you pretty much want to use those kinds of storm-based commander decks to dump a lot of things into the graveyard and then go off from your graveyard with things like Past and Flames and other flashback spells. And plus, like I said, you could just play some spells from your graveyard. It makes it so much easier to get your stuff happening. So this could be an ingredient in decks like that. Again, it is kind of a late game thing probably, but you could probably power it out with things like red and black ritual cards like Dark Ritual, Mana Geyser, and all that stuff. So maybe that might be a place for this to go.
True. I mean, yeah, I don't know if this is really a focused card for a deck. Like the rituals, like you're saying, those are typically just the one-shot mana boosts. I'm not a big fan of those kind of things to get to that point. You're right, it could do that for you, and again, depends what kind of tier level deck you have. So maybe an answer, maybe not. Goofy card, but I gotta love it. I really, there's not many black cards I don't like, but this is definitely on the good side of the spectrum.
And plus, with self-mill, it doesn't really get a lot better than this. But I guess we'll move on to my favorite color, blue. So thank you for bringing it up.
I don't get that many options to make you happy, so why not make it now? So, yes, my number 4 is a card called Grip of Amnesia. And it is an instant that costs 2 mana, 1 generic, and a blue. And this is a counter spell, and a counter target spell unless its controller removes his or her graveyard from the game. Lastly, draw a card. Very simple, very elegant, interesting kind of effect. You have a counter spell legit for, like, instead of having double blue, it's just a generic and a blue, so it's kind of like the cost of a mana drain. But it can potentially whiff, and I know blue players hate that kind of stuff for the fact that they need to be constant with it. They need to make sure it hits. But if it's late game, you're versing a deck that has huge advantages with the grave, we'll say Scarab God, like you're versing that, you need to get rid of graveyards as fast as they possibly can. And there's only so many realistic options that exist in Commander. And if you look at, like, if you are running a counter-heavy base strategy, typically what's the third counterspell you see people use? It's Mana Drain, Counterspell, Arcane Denial?
Yeah,
right?
I was going to
Like,
say
that's-
Arcane Denial is pretty much my counter spell of choice in Commander because it draws cards and counters spells for 2 mana. I mean, what's not to like there?
But you hate giving the advantage to your opponent. So this inherently, you're drawing a card. It's replacing itself nonetheless. So is this a better Arcane Denial?
I don't know. I wouldn't think so because
Oh, it is. Admit it,
Nah.
Kyle. You feel it deep down in your
I don't
core.
think so because if you look at cards like Counterspell and Mana Drain, those are obviously really, really good. Mana Drain being like probably the best counterspell of all
Easily
time.
the best counterspell.
I think with a card like Grip of Amnesia, it just doesn't guarantee that you're going to counter something, and that really hurts. Because sure, they have to have at least one card in their graveyard, but the likelihood is they probably do, and they probably are just going to exile their graveyard in order to pay for this. I think the upside here is, though, that draw a card is added onto it, so you play it for 2 mana, and even if they do kind of exile their graveyard, or if they counter a spell, no matter what the outcome is, you're still going to draw a card, which isn't really bad for 2 mana.
Yeah, if it didn't have that tacked on,
It would be questionable.
Yeah, it'd be very meh.
Yeah.
And even if Counterspell had draw a card on it, would that be better than...
Oh, that would be way too powerful. You can't just have that for 2
But
mana.
compared
No
to
way.
mana drain, it's so that drawing the card is very strong, and that's what makes Cryptic Command so strong. So I think this has a home. I'm not sure if it's a main deck staple kind of thing, but if we keep getting more and more commanders, like Muldrotha just came out, who can just recur stuff from the grave, and we like Scarab God, like we mentioned before, and there's so many more. Mono Black just reanimates like crazy. And white has stuff like Revelark and Karmic Eye just flat out put stuff onto the field. So go ahead, stop something. They're either going to really need to make it so this combo goes off or this board wipe goes off, or they're going to lose their grave. And that can break a deck. Like, that could be really something that can make the game stop for that player. So I think we're both kind of saying the same thing. It could be good, it might not be, but for how much this card costs, it's worth to pick up just as a spec.
Yeah, check it out, absolutely. But speaking of those graveyard decks, my next card actually goes very, very well in them for several reasons. My number 4 is called Benevolent Bodyguard. This is a white creature which costs 1 mana and it is a 1/1 cleric. Now, you can sacrifice Benevolent Bodyguard. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until the end of the turn. And just to kind of refresh everyone's memory on what protection is, you choose a color, let's say protection from red, for example. Then in that case, until the end of that turn, that creature can't be blocked by, dealt damage, enchanted by anything red.
Or equip, those do exist.
Yeah, exactly. Some of them do. So that's just a sampling of what protection really does, and it's very, very powerful as an effect, which is why we don't really see it printed much anymore. Now, the reason I like Benevolent Bodyguard so much is you might look at a card like, for example, a Mother of Runes and say, is Benevolent Bodyguard or Mother of Runes better? One taps to give protection from a color. This one, Benevolent Bodyguard, sacrifices in order to give protection from a color. One is more constant, one is more one-shot. But the reason I like Benevolent Bodyguard so much is because it's great for decks like Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle, or Carador, Ghost Chieftain, which really make a lot of heavy use of the graveyard. This is the 1/1 for 1. You know, it can come out on turn 1 and start swinging, and once you don't really want to use it to swing anymore, its effect is going to protect some of the higher drop creatures that you play later on.
Well, and again, it is a free sack outlet, so cards like Soccer Tribe Elder, who can just go ahead, chump block, sack it, and then you go ahead and get a land. This can do something where it's a 2 for 1. Instead of getting a land, you now have maybe a potential second blocker that you didn't have before, so you can block one, stop all that damage, give another card protection, and inherently stop all that damage as well, potentially kill something that they have as well if it had the same kind of stats or a very low defense. So it is a good card, and there are other cards like this, like the one Kami that you can sacrifice. It's kind of like Spore Frog.
Kami of False Hope, yeah, it's a fog for a free sack effect on a 1/1. Yeah, very, very good. Also, pretty much, I think, a staple in those similar kinds of decks. So is Benevolent Bodyguard? I don't know.
Well, and there are recursion strategies. Play Sun Titan. All right, go ahead. You attack with him. He's got protection. Goes ahead. Swings in, no problem.
Yeah.
Bring back the Bodyguard. So it's a recurable little cycle you can have with that, which is, I'd say, pretty valuable.
Right, and a creature like a Mother of Runes, you couldn't do that same kind of trick, really. So
well, not off the bat. You would have to have the Lightning Greaves or Quiff Boots or something like that. So
that's why I really like this guy. I think he deserves more attention, for sure.
Yeah, I think it could work. I'm not sure if it's a mono-white staple, but there are decks that could be very good in, so
definitely.
Fair point. But moving away from yours into number 3, Kyle, I'm back on the blue train, so let me know if you've seen this card before. It's a card called Mist of Stagnation. It's a 5-drop enchantment that costs 3 generic and double blue. Permanents don't untap during their controller's untap steps. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player untaps a permanent for each card in his or her graveyard. So right here, this is a very unique kind of control card in the fact that the thing that makes it so that you are being killed or slowed down is your grave. If you can make it so that you have a full grave, you're fine. You're loving it, because if you're discarding, milling, being forced to mill, those strategies just don't hurt you anymore. And inherently, if you don't have anything, like if you're not running a fetch land, if you're not using sorceries to go ahead and ramp, like if you just use an Ignite to try to go ahead and use mana rocks to propel yourself, you might not be getting much untapped for quite some time.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna make the same point as I made in the previous video when we talked about Web of Inertia, which is this card is really, really good when used by graveyard-focused decks, and really, really great against decks that don't really play around with the graveyard too much. This may cost 5, so it comes out a little bit later in the game, but still, if you're playing against an opponent who's only played a handful of maybe spells that aren't creatures and has put a few creatures on the board and you just haven't been killing them, this card can lock them down almost completely because it's all permanents, like lands and creatures and basically everything you can imagine. Once it's tapped, it's going to stay tapped unless they start having some kind of a big graveyard, and there are ways to control that. So imagine playing this and then exiling somebody's graveyard that you don't like. They don't get to untap anything. That would be just mean.
Yeah, that Bajuka Bog is mean as it is. Now you go ahead and make it so that they are kind of winter orbed, and yeah, like the Scarab God loves using the grave, right? It loves stealing people's stuff from the grave. So if you were to actually run this in that deck, it'd be very powerful. You can go ahead and make it so you can untap more and make it so that your opponents untap less. My bad, excuse me. So you can make it so that they're slowed down. And again, the biggest point about this is slowing down their mana. If you can't play stuff in your hand because you're not allowed to, you're slowing them down at an enormous speed. And Winter Orb is probably the bane of almost all of those. And
Definitely.
Dampening Sphere, I mean, you have other stuff that kind of like taps, like obligates the mana cost, but like flat out untapping is the biggest thing. Winter Orb, you can get around it by just tapping it. You're unaffected by it, and you can just go ahead and have a full regular turn. This doesn't make that the case. So if you have a board full of creatures and nothing in the grave, people aren't going to want to board wipe you just for the fact that if they remove that, they now have another problem that they have to deal with. So it makes it a little bit more niche. Granted, it is a little bit of a gimmick, and I see your point. Late game, this might not do anything. But if you get it out early, you might have something scary.
Yeah, the biggest problem I can see is if you really do lock someone down with this, they're going to start accumulating cards in their hand that they can't play, and eventually they're going to have to start discarding cards from their hand, which kind of works against you when this sort of comes out in the game, because the more cards they end up tossing out of their hand, the more things are going to untap. Oh, maybe it will. Certainly.
Like, if you have 4 cards because you've been playing a couple lands, like, yeah, you could tap the one land for when you need it, or you're not going to tap anything to wait for the perfect time. So it's going to slow it down, and if you're playing the right way, you should close up the game before they can get back in.
So, I don't know, a bit too situational for my taste. I like cards that are a little more all-purpose than this, but you play this in a deck, like you said, Scarab God, or maybe one of my personal favorites, Sidisi. So I think it would be probably a pretty fun addition, and one that I'd be at least willing to try out.
Oh, all right, well, let me know how it turns out.
Well, I will.
Moving on, and I see you have a blue card on your list now, Kyle, at number 3.
I do. My number 3 is another blue card, as you said, and it's a sorcery this time. It's called Quiet Speculation, and it costs 2 to play, 1 colorless and 1 blue. Search target player's library for up to 3 cards with flashback and put them into that player's graveyard. Then the player shuffles his or her deck. Now, the reason this card is on my list, and the reason I think it is so good, is because of the flashback ability itself. Now, as we all remember, flashback means you can cast a spell from the graveyard, usually for an alternative kind of cost, whether it be mana or whether it be something else. Quiet Speculation pretty much sets you up so that you can put the 3 most powerful flashback spells you have from your deck straight into your graveyard, and then be ready to use them. And there are some really, really good combos that you can set up with this. I mean, just think of some of those powerful flashback spells like I mentioned. The one that comes to mind most often is Past in Flames, because that's always the way degenerate combos start, is by playing that out of the graveyard. There are a lot of things you can do with this.
Well, and also, I don't think we have an image for it, but Divine Reckoning is actually one of my most favorite board wipes. So, like, being able to consistently have that just for when you need it, it'll cost 7 mana over the 4, which is, Wrath of God pretty much for you.
Yeah.
But it's still good just to have as a safety net. And again, this is target player. This is teammates. You have politics involved in Magic. So, I mean, go ahead. This could work very well for you, and it could help someone if they actually need an answer right then. If you were about to lose the game because there's like a Macias on the field and they're going to go infinite, all right, if someone's like, hey, choose me, tag me, I'm in the game. All right, yeah, I'll let you get it. Take care of it for me. And now let's just see if we're still allies after that. So you have some options with it.
Yeah, in multiplayer, it kind of takes on even more of a new dimension, and with Two-Headed Giant and Battle Bond coming out, makes everything have kind of a new significance like that. But this is a great card because things like Entomb that just put cards straight from your deck into the graveyard have historically been really, really good, especially when they're at very low mana cost, like this one. This could be setting you up for the win even on turn 2, maybe even earlier, who knows?
Entomb's a little stronger because it's not restricted to flashback.
No, of course not.
But flashback is a strong mechanic, and I think it was printed in more than just one block, for example.
Yeah, it was printed in lots of them.
So you do have a nice threshold of cards to pick on from that, so it is something to take note of. It could work for more cards to come out in the future. It's a good tech card. It's nifty. I wouldn't say this would get countered because, I mean, if this happens early enough, people are going to want to save the counter spell for probably the flashback card.
Yeah, whatever you end up getting.
Yeah, so this will probably go off when you need it, and it inherently is almost a tri-tutor for blue.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is pretty nice.
Yeah, they don't really have access to this. Now, I mean, it's a little bit of a beefed-up Mystical Tutor. But enough about this card, Kyle. It is horrible. No, I'm kidding. But we're going to my wheelhouse of green. At number 2, we're talking about an enchantment called Epic Struggle. It costs 4 mana, 2 generic, and double green. And it reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more creatures, you win the game. Win cons are very, very strong. And having them something that can just sit out there and be good for whenever is very strong as well, for the fact that this isn't hard to do, especially in green. And you have tons of commanders out there that just go ahead and populate the field. Like right off the top of my head, I can think of Rise the Redeemed. You have Gave, whatever his name is, the Guru of Spores. And then you also have my other little favorite tech card, how do you say this one?
Jolrael,
I can't read these cards for the life of me. Kyle has always been my interpreter, so I apologize for butchering all these cards up, especially the ones in the past. But these are really easy ways to make it so that your creature count can go up to double digits in seconds. Just a turn or two can go ahead and make it so you have 20 creatures out, depending on how you're playing. So this is a very easy way for token decks. And again, token decks are green. They are white, green, and maybe potentially black.
Perhaps. So there was a whole bunch of these cards actually printed, and there have been more as the course of time has gone on. But in Judgment, there was a whole cycle of these alternative win conditions, like having 200 cards in your deck, or having more than 50 life, or whatever like that. But Epic Struggle is an interesting one because I think it's one of the easier ones to fulfill. Not the easiest. We're going to get to that later on in another video, but I think this is probably the second best, maybe, of that cycle, because as you said,
it's the best. Just admit it, Kyle.
Come on. Well, in a green deck, having 20 or more creatures is not necessarily all that hard. My only problem is you have to time this very carefully, much like I was talking about with Hunting Grounds. You can't just play this out there before it has a chance of doing anything, because it's an alternate win condition. It's just going to get picked off as quickly as possible, and that's going to be that.
Yeah, you don't play this on turn 4 if you have 2 creatures out. You're just asking for it to get destroyed, or people to be like, yeah, I thought you were a teammate. I'm gonna let him attack you now. This is totally gonna. I allow this. This board wipe is totally fine.
Right.
So yeah, be tactical with it. But something I've rarely seen played, and I've played against a lot of token-based strategies, and they always seem to be surprised when I mention this card exists.
Yeah, it seems like something that more people should take note of. Definitely, I'd like to see this played more. But here, going on to a card that I have actually seen played a lot and is really, really quite good and just happens to be on the cheap. For number 2 on my list, it's Balthor the Defiled. This is a black legendary creature. It's a zombie dwarf. You don't see those types together very often.
It's a tiny dead guy.
It's 2 colorless and 2 black, so a 4-drop, 2/2 creature. And his abilities are, all minions get +1/+1. You can also tap 3 black and exile Balthor. Each player returns all black and all red creatures from their graveyard to the battlefield. The reason I love this card so much is mostly because of its legendary status.
Not his beautiful face?
Well, I don't know about that, but this could be potentially a very, very good commander. I've seen it before, used both as a commander and in a commander deck. This card wins games. It's basically like a Rise of the Dark Realms on a stick, almost.
Yeah.
Because it's really, really good. Mono black, loves sacrificing things, loves killing things off, putting cards in the graveyard, both you and your opponent, and this is going to basically get you all of your resources back. Maybe some of your opponents, it's true, will benefit from this because they may be running black and red too, but you're probably going to have it better than they do, and a smart player can usually play around this with effects like Bojuka Bog and whatnot.
Yeah, you can make it so you get all the benefits and none of the backlash. And I mean, inherently, I mean, it's not exactly like this, but this card just speaks to me as Replenish. Replenish legit just returns all enchantments back from the graveyard back into play. So this is a creature variant, but it's a commander that can be recurred all the time, because even though you exile this card, he's not exiled. He's back in the command zone waiting to be brought out again. So it's a very strong effect. He does win the game. He is his own win con. I mean, all you have to do is play cards, blow up the board, discard stuff, block, attack, and inherently you just get more and more gas. So people eventually are going to start being like, yeah, I've kind of been helping his strategy the whole time. I'm going to have to reconsider that next time I see this kind of deck. So it's very hard to play against. The only way to really do it is a Bojuka Bog. You need a Bojuka Bog before they Bojuka Bog.
Yeah, or something like that exiles the graveyard, but seriously, the fact that his ability can be used at instant speed and pretty much the second he comes out on the field and nobody can really stop it all that easily, this makes it a very, very scary card to play against, especially in a format like Commander where there are even more powerful cards running around and in the graveyard a lot of the time.
And correct me if I'm wrong, so he has an instant speed pseudo sack effect. If you were to block, even though it says remove, you would be able to like stop all that damage.
Oh yeah, as long as the creature doesn't have trample or something. Yeah, absolutely.
Hold on, and go from that thought again.
Oh yeah, well I mean the graphic was up. Did it stop recording the sound or?
No, it didn't. But,
okay.
Just go from that thought again, and then I'll come back to you guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
What thought?
The blocking.
Okay. Oh, all right. The thing I said last. Duh.
I'll keep it on the card so you can just cut.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And also one thing to note, like this is an instant speed sack out, even though it removes. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle. If you were to do this, if there's army coming at you, you can go ahead, use this guy, block, prevent the damage, and then go ahead and populate the field as well. Like that would be able to stop even more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as long as the creature doesn't have trample, you can stop pretty much all damage just by blocking with it. Then you exile it, you get a bunch of creatures back, and you're probably going to win the game on the next swing. So it's just really, really good. I've seen this before, but I don't think I see it nearly enough because I think too many people are nervous about helping out other players. And admittedly, I'm not normally all about that. That's true. But there are just the amount of advantage you're going to get and the amount of advantage anyone else is going to get. There's a crazy imbalance there.
I had this like on film now, so I can totally use this against you in the future when you're telling me that's not the case for certain cards, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, enough of your card. I'm going to move on to my supreme card for this set. And, Kyle, what's magic about without a little glory?
Well, that
is the name of this card, and legit, it is a creature incarnation that is 5 mana, 3 generic and double white. It is on a 3/3 body that can fly. But the best part about this card is what it can do for 3 mana. If you go ahead and pay double generic and a white, creatures you control gain protection from the color of your choice until the end of turn. Play this ability if glory is in your graveyard. So this is kind of like what you're saying with your benevolent bodyguard. You are being able to give your creatures protection. Recurable, instant speed, protection. Where do you get that in the game consistently? Like, you have to destroy the grave to get rid of this. There's no way for this to really be stopped. Like, can this be stifled? It's not on the field.
I mean, I think it probably could. But, it's very, very hard to get rid of this without some kind of graveyard removal. And you kind of forget it's there. But that's what makes it so dangerous. Because giving one creature protection is annoying. Giving all of your creatures protection, especially if you're in a one-on-one game against a deck that has very few colors, I mean, wow, that can be game-breaking right there.
Yeah, Chroma's Memorial is one of the reasons why that is, so good. Because protection from 2 colors, 2, correct?
Yes.
That's just unheard of. You're getting an advantage at least off of 1 player, if not more. So it's kind of like a card like giving all your creatures Spectral Ward. If you have the mana for it, again, you can give your creatures protection from every single color. But you will have to be a little careful, because as you can see here on Spectral Ward, it makes it so that this aura will stay on it. So if you have auras on your creatures, they might get removed. So you have to be a little bit more careful with that. But it's really good if somebody's trying to go ahead and use spot removal. Beast Within, something that's always something to be worried about. If you're trying to go ahead and swing in for an attack, make sure that you're not going to have to worry about losing your field. Or if someone's coming at you with some big stuff, yeah, they don't have trample. Good luck getting through, guys.
Yeah, but of course the issue here with all of these incarnations is they're only good if they're in the graveyard. So if you end up drawing this or end up having to play it on the field for whatever reason, it's going to be really awkward and very vulnerable to getting removed.
Yeah, but there's tons of cards that can discard. I mean, there's commanders even that go ahead and do stuff like that. Like Magetta the Lion would be a really good serviceable spot for something
true.
like that.
Yeah.
But it's really, really something interesting. And like I said, Magetta the Lion, Sigarda would be really good, and I mean Carador, because they just love having stuff in the grave. So it's not too hard to be able to play something like, I don't know, Survival of the Fittest. Dump this into the grave early, get something that's value to you, and just keep the value train going for you. So this is really, really something that can just be a staple in mono white, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to pay mana for this ability, but the fact that you can use it on anybody's turn is really, really nice. It blanks spot removal that comes out of nowhere, can make all of your creatures unblockable or unkillable by the opposing army. Yeah, that's pretty good.
But your argument that it needs mana, what does it need mana?
Actually, my next card does this a similar thing and doesn't ask for any mana for it. So my number one card of Judgment is a red incarnation creature called Anger. This is a 4-drop and a 2/2 at that. 3 colorless, 1 red, has haste. As long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. So Glory is actually part of a rare cycle of incarnations like Genesis, and there are other ones too, one in each color, that ask for a mana cost for a specific effect while they're in the graveyard. There's an uncommon cycle as well, including Anger right here, that only asks for it to be in your grave and you to have a certain type of land in play. And Anger, honestly, is probably one of the most well-known cards from Judgment, if not the most well-known, because it's probably the most widely played of the incarnations. Ooh. Everyone recognizes how good this card is, because let's face it, haste is one of the best possible abilities you can give a creature in Magic. The ability to swing as soon as a creature comes out. Not all creatures have it, so you kind of take it for granted, and when you have it, you realize, oh yeah, this is really, really good.
Yeah, it makes it so that people have less time to deal with your problems, and that is something that gives you the big advantage there. But I'm really surprised, Kyle. You're a blue player. You chose a red card.
Well, see, I considered Wonder being somewhere on this list. Wonder being the blue incarnation that, as long as you have an island, gives everything flying. That is really good, but making something evasive isn't always as good as letting something attack on the first turn it comes out.
True.
And it's also quite a bit easier for a red card to get into the graveyard than a blue card. Blue does a lot of card drawing, doesn't do a lot of milling or discard except with help from other colors. Red, however, does do a lot of discarding on its own.
Yeah, like Madness and such like that.
Right. So Anger, I mean, being able to put this into the grave and giving all creatures haste for basically the rest of the game as long as somebody doesn't get rid of your graveyard is just crazy, crazy good. And the only downside here is that it can't be searched easily in red. It's best, I think, in multicolor decks where you can pair it with something like black or maybe even blue or another color that easily tutors things. And yeah, I mean, you have that going for you. Just have a party, go to town. I mean, this is just going to be amazing, the amount of aggression you can put in play.
Oh, and one thing I like that Wizards did, and I'm not even sure it's intentional, but like I love the flavor of how like legit what each one of these incarnations does. The name suits it. Like having something come at you all the time, it just kind of makes you angry. Like giving them all flying, you're just kind of like, oh, how am I going to deal with that? You're just kind of like always wondering about it.
Yeah.
And like Glory, yeah, if you're not winning because of that effect, I mean, you might need to reconsider your deck a little bit. So it's, I think it had really good flavor style. It's a really unique kind of way of like going about the game, and even though they're kind of a pain, I think they're fair. And they're really good budget options, too.
Oh, definitely. And this actually, they've been reprinted several times. Most of them, Anger especially, has brought down its price tag like a lot. It used to be a lot more expensive than it is now. But seriously, with all the wheeling and discarding effects that Red has, this is just a slam dunk in pretty much any deck that has Red in it, in my opinion.
Totally. Well, also, we'll do a poll right now. Let us know who chose the better incarnation. Is it Glory or is it Anger? Which one can you see being the true winner of the game? So that is going to conclude our pool time today on the Hidden Gem segment of Judgment. But if you like the cards that we had in our pool, be sure to let us know which ones are your favorites and what you think of them in Magic as a whole.
You can also let us know what you think either in the comments down below or reach out to us on social media at our Reddit, Twitter, and Facebook pages, all at the handle MTG The Card Pool.
And be sure to follow us for next week, in which we dive into the money cards that we found in Judgment as well. But until then, I'm Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson. And we'll see you next time at the Card Pool.